everybody. My name is Wanda Stutsman. I'm a Tarrant County Master Gardener. I live in Northeast Tarrant County. Have been in this area for a long time. Pretty developed area. We have a lot of different landscape designs in this area. And as you're driving down the road, a lot of times you stop and you say, oh my gosh, what's that tree? Sometimes people are planting more unique trees. So I thought maybe I could put a presentation together that would talk about unique trees in landscape. And if you're like me, you've driven down the road, you wanted to stop the car and go knock on somebody's door. Maybe you're not like me. Maybe you don't want to go do that. But it just happened to me yesterday. I was driving past an insurance company. It's a little old building, and there was a blooming tree in the front yard. Couldn't have been a desert willow, but I knew it couldn't have been because the desert willow doesn't bloom this time of year. There's everything I could do to not stop and go inspect the tree and find out what it was. We're filming this in the springtime when a lot of trees are in bloom. Therefore, we're really recognizing some of the trees more frequently, wanting to know what that tree is. So that is what we're going to discuss today. A lot of unique trees that you can put in your landscape. Our presentation today is brought to you by Tarrant County Master Gardeners, AgriLife Extension, and TRWD, which is Tarrant Regional Water District. We have partnered with Tarrant Regional Water District for the last 2 to 3 years. The purpose for our partnership is to bring awareness to residents of Tarrant County about water conservation and means in which you can just design and plant gardens and trees to minimize your use of water. We're going to take just a minute and we're going to go over a couple of slides and talk to you about the resources available by TRWD. TRWD, the Tarrant Regional Water District, manage 4 reservoirs and they're pumping water to our area. They manage the water supply, the flood control, and the recreation around those lakes and reservoirs. So it's a large organization. And what they're finding is that the more information they can share with the residents on what they do, what the necessities of conserving water will do for us in the future is really important. Conservation is very important for our water supply. We have quite a few million people here in our Metroplex area right now, and they're expecting that to double or triple in the next 20 to 30 years. And so they want people to consider that instead of just adding large pipelines and pumping stations, that maybe if we conserved a little bit of water, we could grow as a population and not have to grow our supply chain for the water and not rely on as much water in years to come. So one of the things that they offer on their website is a free sprinkler check. You can have a licensed sprinkler person come to your home and check your sprinklers. And sprinklers need to be checked all the time. And we do it here at our house. We have a large sprinkler system, and my husband and I tag up, and he goes out to the sprinkler heads and I go to the control box, and we run all the zones for 2 or 3 minutes just to make sure there's no leakage, there's no heads blown off by lawnmowers. And so a sprinkler check person will come by and do that. They'll also look at your timing and the programming on your device. They can consult with you on installing rain sensors. And you can also sign up for a free weekly watering advice. It's custom to your location. So if you live in the Cross Timbers area where there's shade versus another area where it's with pasture land at one time, you get some advice. A calendar of events for different classes that they're going to hold, and TRWD does go around and we'll tag along with them, and they do a lot of neighborhood presentations on water conservation. And then they also have links on their website for water saving tips and videos. So we're really excited about our partnership with them, and we hope you consider checking out their website. These are some of the common trees that you're going to see all the time in your landscape and or in other people's landscapes. And they're used widely in Texas. There's the magnolia, the live oak, the post oak, the Yopon holly, and the Bradford pear. The Bradford pear it's really striking for a few weeks in the spring with its blooms, and it's extremely striking in the fall with its colorful foliage. And we really admire them, and they're really pretty, but they're not a desirable tree anymore. We've learned over the years that their really lifespan is only about 20 years, and they have a multi-trunk function at the top of the main trunk. And those can divide and split in storms. And I know many of you all probably experienced that in your own yard. So today, let's talk about trees that you could plant beside the Bradford pear, besides the magnolia, and besides the live oak. So we're going to get going with spring flowering trees. And I said we were recording this in the springtime. You may not be viewing it in the springtime, but the trees are fascinating. They're just full of buds and blooms, and definitely a head jerker when you're going down the road and you're wondering, what is that tree? And just as I said, I saw one in an insurance parking lot. You see some of these really remarkable trees in commercial park properties and plantings. A lot of them look alike. There's so many different pinks. We have the cherry. Over here, we have the peach, the redbud, Mexican buckeye, which we're going to talk about a little bit more. We're going to talk about a redbud more. And then the saucer magnolia, which we're going to talk about some more. But the first tree, I guess, is the buckeye. And as of today, mine looks like this. It has blooms all over it. The leaves are just starting to sprout out. This is 2021. We just had a hard freeze in February, and I wasn't sure that a Mexican buckeye, when you hear the word Mexican or Spanish or Brazilian or anything in front of the name, Chinese, China tends to be on the same weather pattern that we are on, but a lot of times you are hesitant about those plants in our landscapes, especially since we just had that very disastrous freeze. But it survived, so that's really exciting. So a Mexican buckeye, mine in my yard is a multi-trunk tree. It branches from the bottom, so when it's smaller, it could look like a shrub. It is a deciduous tree. What is really nice about this is it's more drought tolerant. The seeds are poisonous, so if you plant it in your backyard, your dogs probably don't need to be near that tree or the seeds. And I would recommend that you plant it maybe in the front yard or wherever your animals are not going to be. It has brilliant spring color. And what is neat about this tree is that the fall color is so opposite the color scale as the spring color. You have the oranges and yellow foliage in the fall, and then you have the beautiful pink in the spring. During the rest of the year, it is just going to look green. And it has a really nice soft foliage. Again, mine is more of a large shrub. It could be up more like a tree. I have not seen one that doesn't grow more like a shrub. This is really ideal down here and where the pink blooms are in the spring, and you can see the branching of the bottom of the trunk. So the other tree I mentioned earlier, pink in the spring, is a saucer magnolia, and they come in many different varieties. There are a lot of them called Jane, Kate, Kathy. I think every female name, there's 50 of them. And some bloom a little earlier in February, and then some bloom a little later in March. And be cautious of the ones that bloom earlier in February because they tend to get freeze damage because we'll tend to have a freeze as we did this year. And of course, both of my saucer magnolias buds froze during the freeze that we just had. So this year was sort of a bust, but they put out a really pretty green foliage and definitely an eye catcher in your landscape, and your neighbors will be envious if you plant one. So consider this, and they have beautiful soft foliage the rest of the year, and I think just make a very nice statement tree. The Oklahoma redbud. And the reason I mentioned Oklahoma instead of Eastern redbud is because Oklahoma is more my favorite. It has a darker bud flower on it in the spring than the Eastern redbud. And we have several of them around here and several Easterns planted near Oklahoma redbuds. And you can definitely see the difference. Here on Dove Road in Northeast Tarrant County near Vaquera, there are several different specimens of them, and they are really pretty. And it's really nice to see the different shades of color on them. So all redbuds are not created equal, so do your homework on those. It is a deciduous tree, can tolerate full sun in northern climates. I would recommend that it have afternoon shade, morning sun only. Another wonderful tree that blooms in the springtime is the Mexican plum. It is a white flowering tree. And here you see that it has a main trunk and multi branching at the top of the main trunk. The beautiful tree produces large white blooms, and it can be confused with a flowering cherry that also blooms white. What's really nice about this tree, again, is that it has beautiful spring flowers, and then in the fall, it has gorgeous dark foliage and can be kind of a wine color at times, depending on how much of a drought or how much rain we've had leading up to fall. It has these little berries on it in the spring after the flowers have faded and the leaves come out, and it produces a fruit. And so therefore you might want to check that out. It might be a little messy on a patio, but in this picture here, they have it out in the landscape, and it's very nice. The Eastern dogwood. I just saw a dogwood today. It was in full bloom. And then I have a friend who has a pink dogwood, and it has not even leafed out. It is leafing out slightly. And we did have a large freeze and a really harsh freeze. So maybe the tree will come back. She thinks it will. So I'm going to go with that. And we'll see. But she's probably missed the bloom season for this year on her tree. But the white one I saw on my drive home a little while ago was in full bloom, and it was just beautiful. But one of the things that I don't see a lot of in Texas are the red berries on the trees in the fall. And I'm not quite sure if I just don't pay attention to them, but they should be there. And, obviously that's how the tree propagates. It drops those berries, and or birds come and eat them and distribute the seeds. So this tree is wonderful, a great understory tree for Texas. It definitely cannot handle the harsh sunlight we have. And it does like more water than some of our other trees. So maybe that's one of the reasons a lot of people don't plant it. Up here in the Northeast Tarrant County area, we have a lot of post oaks. And so that makes a great canopy because they're deciduous. The post oaks are deciduous, so the tree gets some sunlight in the winter, and then that promotes the blooming in the spring. An evergreen dogwood is something that most of us have never heard of before, but they do exist, and they have a little unique flower versus different than the Eastern dogwood. It is an evergreen, so it does not lose its leaves. So that's kind of a neat feature to this. It also produces a different type of berry, and those kind of look like, I don't know, miniature kickballs or something. But anyhow, that could possibly be messy if they really produce that many. Love evergreen in our gardens, in our landscapes, because we have so many trees that lose their leaves. So planting under larger trees, such as our post oaks, is great. It does need ample watering. It's a beautiful spring color, and then it produces these nice berries in the fall. Probably it's not going to give you as much fall color as you would like, and that's like the Eastern dogwood. But the fact that it stays evergreen is really nice. A rising sun redbud. And this is new to our landscapes by several years, and several people I know have planted them. They are really unique, again, opposite colors on this color spectrum, from spring pink flowers to fall orange and green flowers, and bright yellow and orange, rather. What I have found with the few that I've seen planted is that they can get a little leggy. Their stems come out and they go very far, and they can get very leggy. So learn how to prune a tree correctly, like pruning a stem back to a joint, not just cutting the stem off a blunt cut. And you'll need to prune this tree. But what's unique about this red bud is that it takes full sun, and most red buds don't like full sun. A lot of people will plant them in full sun, but they wilt terribly in the afternoon, and they bounce back. I have a red bud in my backyard that does get too much sun. It was planted there before we moved here, but it's still holding on. It's still doing okay. Texas mountain laurel. This is an evergreen tree as well. It is extremely slow growing, but it produces a really pretty blue flower, and it produces that a little later in the spring than maybe a red bud or a dogwood would produce. It produces these seed pods that have red seeds in them. They're kind of striking. They do not propagate very well on their own. The we have learned in propagation class that the seeds have to be scarified in order to really burst open to propagate. So if they just drop on the ground or a bird eats them or such and carries them off, they may not propagate. So we don't see a ton of Texas mountain laurel seedlings in our area. I mentioned it does grow very slowly. One of my friends said she wanted to put one in a certain place where she needed a very large tree. And I said, well, when you are about 20 years, when you're ready to sell the house, the tree will be the right size. You really have to think about that and don't let anyone fool you because they really do grow slow. So maybe an accent tree on a small patio, that type of thing would work best for Texas mountain laurel. And I do recommend just buy the largest one you can find. I think it makes a great addition to a backyard patio area. Flowers smell lovely and it's drought tolerant. I think that's a winner. An Eve's necklace is a unique tree. It has a really special kind of bloom here. You see that it looks as if maybe kind of an orchid look to it, I guess. And it produces these chains of seeds, and that's why they call it an Eve's necklace. It has a really pretty foliage and it can handle full sun, part shade. It's also very drought tolerant. And so here in this picture up here, you can see that it's planted with some yuccas and some salvia greggii and such. And it has a really nice shape to it. All of them aren't going to have the same shape, but this one tells you that maybe you would have an opportunity to have that kind of shape with it. So really another one, the blackberries have been used by Indians in the past and settlers for dye. And so that probably would tell you that if they got on concrete, they could stain your concrete. So it's interesting how you kind of put two and two together where, okay, so this berry was used for dye. So if I get it in my yard and I have it on my really nice patio surface, it's probably going to stain your patio. So you have to think ahead. Another unique tree that's not used hardly at all around here, but will grow here and is a smoke tree. And I just love it because it makes you look like you didn't put your contacts in because it's kind of blurry. It makes a wonderful backyard garden anchor, let's say tree. And I'm going to call it a tree, even though most of them tend to be shaped more like a shrub. And I think it just adds that really nice pop of color, a deep dark purple, where, maybe you need it to soften a fence, maybe to hide a shed, that type of thing in your garden. And it's definitely a conversation tree. Everybody who visits your yard is going to ask, well, what is that? So it has some wet tolerance. It does have a lot of drought tolerance. And obviously it can grow very large if it's not pruned. But if you have it in your landscape, most likely you're going to keep it maintained. But again, look for a smoke tree as an anchor to a flower bed or such in your backyard. Trees that provide fabulous color for us in the fall. We have a lot of trees in Texas that will grow here that will produce a lot of fabulous color. When we put in our new landscapes and our new homes, developer or the builder definitely doesn't consider year-round color. They're not interested. They're not going to be there. They're not living in the house. They just want to put something in there that fills the space. So if you have the opportunity to build a house, maybe consider working with a builder to pick trees, specific trees based on maybe this presentation or other things that you've learned from Texas Master Gardeners to give you that wow factor as they grow and mature. So these two pictures, I can bet neither of these houses are in Texas, but I can tell you that you can get close to these looks from adding certain trees that we have that will grow here in Texas. And we're going to talk about those. Ginkgo tree. This is a remarkable tree. This is going to give you a bright yellow in the fall. It's just golden. There are several varieties, but this one is the most common. And I recommend that you only buy the male trees. Now, most nurseries are only going to carry the male trees. The female trees down here have a fruit on them. It's not an edible fruit, and I don't believe it's poisonous, but when it rots on the ground, it smells like manure. And that is not something any of us want to be smelling in our gardens. Not unless it's manure we put there to make our plants grow, and that's usually like chicken manure, but really a horrible odor. So avoid female ginkgo trees. Ginkgo trees can grow really large, but they're more linear and they have a single trunk in most cases. And they make a beautiful green accent to your yard when it's not fall. They are a deciduous tree. They are going to lose their leaves in the winter. Again, it's a more expensive tree, so make it a focal point and put it where you're going to see it in the fall because it's going to be really, really pretty. Chinese pistache. Now, this is a commonly used tree in our Texas landscapes, and I think they started using these probably in the late 90s. It makes a remarkable color in the fall. It has leaves turning at the tips of their branches. It always stumps me every time I drive by it. I'm like, wow, what is that? And then I have to remember. A lot of people, many of you may only have very small ones in your yard, so they're not as striking, but they will get bigger. They produce a cluster of berries, but I don't have a Chinese pistache in my yard, so I'm not quite sure how messy the berries are on your landscape. Really a pretty tree and real soft flowing branching leaves. Then I think that this does add a lot of texture to your landscape. And then in the fall, it adds some spectacular color. It can be a big tree, but it takes full sun, and it just handles just ample landscape watering. A possum haw holly, now this is a little different because it's evergreen all through the summer, or not evergreen, but it's green all through the summer. And then in the fall, it produces these beautiful berries and the leaves drop off. And this is something you will stop and look at as you're driving down the road. And it's really pretty. And then you'll get a whole cluster of birds, a whole flock of some type of bird. They'll come in and just eat all the berries off of it at one time. And that happened in February in my yard. I had quite a few different types of birds come through right before that cold front, that freeze, and they took all the berries. But you get to enjoy it through November, December. It takes full sun, which is another plus for Texas. It have average watering, nothing special on watering. They can send up little runners, just like a yaupon, from the shoots from their roots. So it can be a little messy. Maybe you have to touch it about 3 or 4 times a year to prune those to keep your bed nice. One of the things in this bed, I think this is Asian jasmine below it, and that's fine. That's full sun. But I like it when there's something softer under there, other types of plantings, because when the shrub is green all year, you want to see some color in the lower part of your landscape. People don't think of possum haw hollies when they're picking hollies, but I do recommend this one. We have a lot of different types of oaks in Texas. Many of them do have colors variations in the fall. Shumard red oak will have the most brilliant red, and it is used widely. It can grow very large, so make sure you have the ample place for it in your landscape. It drops its acorns, and they propagate very easily. So you'll have a lot of seedlings under, and you just have to mow those over. The way you tell a red oak from another type of oak is red oaks are some of the very, very few oaks that have a pointed end on the end of at the points of their leaves. Most oaks, those are all oblong or oval or rounded. And a red oak is going to be pointed. And so that was one of the first things I learned as a master gardener. I was really proud of myself for being able to identify red oak. Now, why did I say Shumard red oak versus others? Well, most red oaks are promiscuous. That means that if you get a seedling out of somebody's yard, you're not guaranteed that that's a Shumard red oak. You're not guaranteed what that is. If you go to a nursery, you go to a well-known nursery that sells trees all the time, and they'll get their trees from growers, and they will have the right hybrid or the right classification on their trees, and you'll be more likely to get what you're paying for. Again, that adds some significant color. So you say, okay, I'm going to put the ginkgo over here on the left side of the house. I'm going to put the Shumard red oak over here on the right side of the house. And there you go. You've got yellow and red, brilliant yellow in the fall for your fall color. Add a possum holly or so in another place in your landscape, and you've got red berries. So not very hard to do to add to get some nice fall color. A bald cypress tree. Now, if any of you all have a lot of land, I recommend bald cypress trees. I have not planted one here. We're our very sandy soil here. The bald cypress tend to like to grow near a pond or a lake because they like their feet to be wet. See them in various places. But why do I pick that out as for fall color? Because look at this brilliant reddish rust color and put that against a backdrop of green, and it stands out sharply. And I think that it does really add really nice fall color. There's a hospital office down from us that has them in their median. And my mother-in-law had a doctor's appointment this last fall, or several of them. And so we were there, and you had to wait in your car until they were ready for you. And we always were talking about how pretty the bald cypress were in the median there at the doctor's office, because one, we had a minute to take note of them, and two, they really were striking. So, maybe consider a couple bald cypress out by the pond in the backyard if you have one. A Japanese maple. This is a blood good. There are hundreds of varieties of Japanese maples. I recommend every one of them because I just absolutely love Japanese maples. They come in green, yellow, reds, just every color. No yard should be without one. And so I probably have 6 or 7 in my garden. And this one is one of the ones that performs really well and adds just a beautiful red color all year, and definitely a focal point to any garden around a patio or to the side of a sidewalk or front entry to a house. And you see a lot of people using Japanese maples, but I do recommend this bloodgood. And I was really fortunate. All maples are grafted to a root stock of some sort, but I had a seedling come off of one of mine, and the seedling is more true to a bloodgood. And I have grown it to about a 4.5 foot tall tree. And so I was really shocked. I had to ask a few people in the tree maple business and ask them how that's possible when they typically have to be grafted to a different root base. And they said that sometimes it just happens. So I was the lucky one. Anyhow, they are really fun and pretty trees, and definitely a nice focal point to a garden. And a red bark maple. I do not own one of these, but I admire them everywhere I see them. They're not as common in our landscapes, but I recommend that, again, if you have a really nice little area around the patio. Now, they do like afternoon shade. They will take morning sun, but I would not recommend putting them in full sun. And what is really unique about this tree is that it has the bright red bark. And what's funny is we think of bark like on a post oak or a pine tree or something, a bark that you can flick off. Well, all trees have bark. It's just a matter of what does it look like. So the paradigm shift here is it's just the thin coating over the stem of the tree, and it's red, and it's just really pretty. And look at these beautiful green leaves against it. So you've got color all year round with this tree. So it's worth the investment. It's not going to be a cheap tree, but it is definitely worth the investment. Lace bark elm. I see these every now and then. Grapevine Botanic Gardens has quite a few of them. Elm trees, as a whole, they drop a lot of seeds, and you get a lot of seedlings. So I recommend a lace bark elm or any elm tree out in a grassy area that you mow frequently. Don't put it in as a specimen in a flower bed. That would be your worst nightmare. Don't put potted plants under your lace bark elm. It'll be a nightmare. But why do I recommend it? I recommend it in the right place because the fall color is bright yellow. It's beautiful. And then you can't go wrong with the trunk and the bark on it. It's just really, really pretty. And those of us who love to do garden design and landscaping, we are always looking for something unique to add to our gardens and to add to our landscape for our own visual interest. Because we all like to walk around our own gardens and see our trees and plants. This is just really, really pretty. And I do recommend it. But again, do not put it where the seedlings are going to be a problem. River birch tree. I love these trees. I've seen them being used more and more in landscapes. When you hear something that says river, that usually means it's going to need more water. Um, but I have seen these planted in a more of a xeriscape in front of a ranch near my house, and they are very striking with the fence behind them or in front of them. And of course, the interest on the trunk is just fabulous with the lacing off of the peeling off of the bark. And I think if I were a kid, I would go and peel it off all day long, and my mother would probably yell at me or whatever, but I think that would be fun. And the other thing I want to talk to you about is when you're picking out trees for your landscape, notice that this is a multi-trunk tree. Multi-trunk trees have their purpose in our landscapes. You don't always have to have a single trunk tree. We talked about the Mexican buckeye being kind of a multi-trunk shrub tree. We know that our crepe myrtles are multi-trunk. So if I were personally searching for a river birch, I would be looking for a multi-trunk. I think it gives you much more interest in your landscape, and it fans out, and it's just a really pretty tree. It also gives you a brilliant yellow color in the fall. So again, here we have several trees that give you a brilliant yellow color. And I kind of want to just move to another place and plant all these trees so that people can drive by and see my house in the fall, and they'll be like, well, why can't I have a house like that? Not the house, but the landscape. That's not going to happen. So anyhow, it's really, really pretty tree, and I recommend it for interest. Sweet gum tree. Now, we don't have a lot of these here. They're kind of messy. Down on our county property that we hold our Master Gardener meetings, there's some huge ones. They're probably 50, 60 feet tall. They're sort of out in the middle of the field, and that's mowed all the time. But they're really, really pretty trees. They grow very, very large, so you need a big space for them. But look at the fall color that they produce. Lots and lots of nice fall color. One of the things that they do produce are these little balls, sweet gum balls. And in Tennessee, we had these, and they really hurt your bare feet to walk on. And of course, my sisters and I were always doing gymnastics out in our yard, and we would always sort of jump off the grass or push off from the grass on top of one of these and get it stuck in our foot. They really don't stick and they don't prick, but they're not real comfortable. So consider where you're putting this tree. Obviously a full sun tree because it grows so tall, but the fall color, you can't beat it. Other trees that grow in our landscapes, there's so many trees in Texas that will grow in our landscapes, but sometimes we want a focal point tree or something that draws interest or draws your eye through a garden. And you can see in this particular picture, there's a little pathway, an entryway, and then maybe a little sitting area back here in the back. And then they have, and I am going to say that's a desert willow, but it could be a mesquite tree. But I'm going to say it's a desert willow. You see mesquite trees all out in the fields and such, but when you see a mesquite tree, one by itself in a landscape as a focal point, you're going to want one if you have a patio area or so. Now they do drop seeds and get a lot of seedlings under them, but anyhow, so whether that's a mesquite tree or a desert willow, it's a really pretty soft tree in that landscape. So we have weeping willows in Texas. And again, we don't see a lot of them in our area, but down the street from me, it's real funny, right down the street from me, go from house to house to house, and they're all built by different builders. They're all on a main road. You have one house that has the weeping willow. You have one house that has the river birch. You have one house that has the popular, which we're going to see in just a minute. What's kind of unique sampling of trees in a small area. And none of these people probably know each other. And I think that's just really interesting that they've all chosen different trees. Now, with a weeping willow, what you're going to find with these is they like a little bit more water, and you'll see them growing more around ponds, drainage ditches, areas where there might be a water runoff. So they will grow larger in those areas. So if you have a creek or something running through your backyard, they will grow large near those. And we as children used to swing on the branches. That was a lot of fun. So this is going to be a fun tree for young kids, if you have kids in your yard. And they're really sweet to sit under as well. I have a lot of fond memories of the weeping willows in Tennessee. Japanese black pine tree. Any pine tree is an addition to a yard. I have aspen pines in my yard, and they look similar to this Japanese black pine, but this tree grows more compact and it can be used in more places in your garden. It also is a little bit more drought tolerant. And I like it because it has so much interest and softness. It looks as if you could go up and hug it, but I don't recommend that because it will poke you. But it is a really a nice addition, and you can buy them small. They're kind of expensive, so buy a smaller one and then just watch it grow into your landscape. And it just adds that evergreen to your yard that you would be missing in the winter otherwise. And so you might want to consider something like that. A tulip popular tree, I have just recently started seeing these in some of our landscapes here in Texas. Of course, I'm driving down the road and I see these pretty flowers on a big tall tree, and I'm like, wow. And what is that tree? Again, title of my presentation. And so I figured it out and I was real impressed. It was a smaller backyard in a well-developed subdivision where the houses are close together, but somebody there in that house, probably 15 years ago, because the tree was pretty tall, decided that they wanted to plant one. And it really does make a really nice addition, and people driving on the main road behind their house can enjoy the tree and stop and wonder what that tree is. So maybe consider a tulip popular tree. Chautauqua tree. Now I have several of these. We had more, and they are probably 20 or 17 years old now. And so we had to have several of them cut out. They were lined up along our driveway, and they're very, very messy trees. I call them Dr. Seuss trees because they kind of grow like a Dr. Seuss tree, but they can have a lot of dead in them at times. I have a friend, a master gardener, who has one of these out in the yard. And therefore, she is not concerned with how messy they are. They kind of molt all year long. They're deciduous in the winter. They don't have leaves, but when they do flower for several months, like they're going to start flowering now, and they'll flower all the way to July, and the flowering will become less prevalent as you move towards the September, but they molt, their leaves kind of start falling off all the time. And I don't see it to be too big of a problem because I just blow it into the flower bed below where it's mulched. It kind of looks a little messy, but the flowers drop and they're on the driveway as well, but I blow those in. So this tree is not one I recommend to put anywhere near a pool. It would just be your worst nightmare all year long near a pool. But a really unique tree to add to a landscape, especially in the distance away from concrete or a pool. It is a cross between a catawba tree, which doesn't look anything like this, and a desert willow, which looks a lot like this. A catawba tree is really large, has huge leaves on it. They're very common north of here. And I don't know who decided to try to cross the two or if they just found one that was, but it does make for a really unique tree. So let's get planting. We've talked about a lot of different trees. I hope I've sparked your enthusiasm for adding landscape trees, and I've given you options for spring color, fall color, deciduous, evergreen. But choose your location in your yard where you want to put the tree. And do you want it to be a statement tree, a small accent to a flower bed, or do you want it to be a large tree? Do you want it to shade, potentially grow fast and shade an area that right now gets sun? Do you want it to be deciduous or evergreen? Do you want spring blooms, fall color, or do you want both? We talked about several that give you both. Do you plan to water or you want to let nature water it? All of us are sort of not programmed to just allow nature to water our landscapes. We need to become more programmed to do that, as TRWD will tell you. So one of the things is when you're planting a tree, you want to make sure that you leave the root flare exposed at the bottom of the tree. And over here to the right, you can see a picture, and the bottom flare of the tree is really important to be left exposed. If that area are covered with soil or mulch, and any bacteria or decay starts rotting the bark away, then that just allows for bacteria and infection to get in the tree and kill it. And a lot of trees that were very well above their root flare, some of them have just toppled over, just completely toppled over, been broken in half right there at the root flare because of the disease and the rotting. It's very important on all your trees to make sure that's exposed. And when we drive down the roads and we see mounds of mulch going up the tree trunk, everyone says, oh, that's real pretty. It keeps the weeds out. You don't have to weed eat around it. Well, that's really true, except for it's rotting the tree. Never plant the root flare below ground level. And then the one way to mulch around a tree to keep the weed eater from getting near the tree base is to do a bowl shape mulch feature where you have a mound of mulch and it bowl shapes down and the root flare is still exposed. And that is really attractive in the landscape as well and to the visual eye. So no need to mound that mulch up. That's hurting your tree. Just do a bowl shaped mulch around it and keep the weed eater away from those trees. When you go to purchase a tree, you look for trees that do not have exposed roots above the pot. Look for trees that have ample root ball size for the height of the tree. So if you've got a little bitty container and you've got a 6-foot tree, most likely that's not a healthy tree or not going to be a healthy tree in your landscape. If you get a chance, if you're spending $200 or $300 on a tree, ask them to pull the tree out of the container and just slide it out and look for roots that are wrapping or girdling around the bottom of the root ball. If you see that, that's a problem. Sometimes that can be corrected by clipping those roots before you plant it, but never plant a tree in the ground with wrapping roots because the roots are just going to continue to wrap. They're not going to spread out, and you're going to have a tree that's unstable, and you're going to have a tree that's going to die on you in a few years. So you always want to make sure you inspect the limbs to make sure they're all healthy and there's no wounds, scrapes, or broken limbs. And then if you want a single trunk, look for the central leader in that tree. And that is the limb that comes straight off the trunk, goes straight up. Look to see how straight that is. Does it branch out? Does the tree branch out in the lower third of the tree? You know, it's all what you're looking for. Again, I talked to you about choosing trees that are multi-trunk trees, but all trees don't fit a multi-trunk tree. And so you just have to be more selective on which trees you would purchase for that. Anyhow, there are lots of trees out there. I recommend you go to your nurseries, branch out and go to new nurseries and check out the trees. Planting trees is best to plant them in October and November, but you can definitely plant them in February and March and early April. Much past April, I wouldn't plant too many trees unless they're really small and they're in a landscape that's well watered and you're going to be managing that. But I want to thank you all for joining us today, and I appreciate your time. And if you have any questions, definitely give you information to call our Master Gardener Help Desk to ask questions about trees and get out there and get planting. Thank you very much.